Before we dive into this story that's sure to move you, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It might seem like a small thing, but that simple action makes a huge difference. It's what keeps this channel going and gives me the strength to keep bringing these stories to you. Now, take a deep breath, because what comes next is powerful. Rain washed over downtown Atlanta in steady, rhythmic sheets. The morning sky was the color of ash, and the city pulsed beneath it with a nervous energy. On Pryor Street, the Fulton County Courthouse rose like an old monument, tall, red-bricked, and unshaken by time. Its iron gates were slick with water, and its granite stairs glistened under the downpour. Inside, polished shoes tapped over marble floors as lawyers, clerks, and journalists gathered for what was whispered to be a significant case, something involving a land dispute. Nothing unusual, until a name appeared on the docket that no one recognized. In courtroom 3B, the air was heavy with anticipation. The American and Georgia flags hung behind the elevated judge's bench, their colors muted by the cloudy light seeping through tall windows. Seated high was Judge Richard Bennett, a white man in his early 60s, 6 feet tall, with neatly combed silver hair, a trimmed salt and pepper beard, and sharp cheekbones. He wore thin, metal-framed glasses and a traditional black robe that framed his broad shoulders. Known for his rigid professionalism and icy tone, Judge Bennett was not someone who tolerated unorthodox behavior. His eyes scanned the courtroom, unaware that his beliefs were about to be challenged. The large oak doors at the back of the room creaked open. Stepping inside was Marcus Reed, a 17-year-old African-American male, approximately 5'10", slim build, with smooth dark brown skin, short, neatly cropped black hair, and observant dark eyes. He wore a navy blue dress shirt, slightly faded at the collar, tucked into fitted black slacks. His black leather shoes, though polished, showed clear signs of wear. A worn black canvas backpack hung over his right shoulder. As he walked past the rows of suited adults, the whispers began, soft but sharp. No one recognized him. No one knew he was there to make history. Without hesitation, Marcus sat in the last row, his posture perfectly straight. He kept his eyes forward, his expression calm and unreadable. Murmurs rippled through the room. Is he a witness? An intern? Someone's kid? None of them imagined he was about to stand before the judge. At the front, Judge Bennett glanced at the clerk, who nodded to begin. The court will now hear the matter of Brooks versus Greenfield Corporation, he said. Plaintiff's counsel, please approach the bench. A moment of silence. Then Marcus stood, lifted his backpack, and walked to the front, step by deliberate step. As Marcus approached the lectern, the murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Even the stenographer paused, unsure whether to keep typing. When Marcus placed his backpack neatly at his feet and looked up at Judge Bennett, the room held its breath. Good morning, Your Honor, Marcus said clearly. My name is Marcus Reed. I am representing Mrs. Eleanor Brooks in this matter. A beat of silence. The judge raised an eyebrow, slightly tilting his head. He didn't speak immediately. Around the room, eyes widened in disbelief. A 17-year-old had just claimed to be the lead attorney. Judge Bennett leaned forward slightly, narrowing his eyes behind his glasses. You're the attorney of record for the plaintiff, he asked, his tone halfway between disbelief and irritation. Marcus nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. I passed the bar through the early legal access program. My credentials are in the file submitted by the clerk. The judge glanced at the clerk, who awkwardly shuffled through papers before confirming with a nod. It's all there, sir. The room shifted from confusion to shock. The silence was sharp enough to slice. The judge let out a low exhale, clearly recalibrating. Very well, Judge Bennett said slowly, straightening in his chair. You may proceed, but let me be clear. You will be held to the same standards as any licensed attorney in this courtroom. Marcus nodded without hesitation. Understood, Your Honor. He opened his folder and removed a stack of organized documents, laying them carefully across the lectern. The room remained tense. Some spectators exchanged glances. Others shook their heads in quiet judgment. But Marcus stood tall, unshaken. Behind him, sitting nervously in the second row, was Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, watching with hopeful eyes. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks was in her early 70s, with warm brown skin, silver-streaked hair pulled back into a bun, and soft but tired eyes behind thin glasses. She wore a beige knit cardigan over a simple floral dress. Her hands trembled in her lap as she sat upright, clasping her purse. Eleanor had lived on her land for over 30 years, but now Greenfield Corporation, a massive agricultural developer, was trying to take it from her. Marcus was her only hope. As he began to speak, her breathing slowed. For the first time in weeks, she felt like someone was fighting for her. Marcus cleared his throat and began. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, has resided on her land in South Fulton County for over 3 decades. The property was acquired legally by her late husband in 1992 and has been her home ever since. He held up a copy of the original deed. This is the original land title, registered and notarized. However, Greenfield Corporation is attempting to claim ownership through forged documents and corporate intimidation. His tone was calm but precise. The courtroom listened closely. Even the most skeptical faces had started to pay attention. He laid out documents one by one, referencing property law articles and pointing to notarized records. The deeds filed by Greenfield Corporation contain irregularities, including a signature from a seller who was deceased at the time of signing. He passed copies to the clerk and opposing counsel. Judge Bennett leaned forward, reading carefully. On the other side of the courtroom, Charles Whitman, the lead attorney for Greenfield, watched Marcus with a smirk, until that smirk slowly faded. Marcus wasn't just well prepared, he was surgical. The boy in the thrift store shirt was tearing apart a corporate defense. Charles Whitman, senior partner at a prestigious Atlanta law firm, was used to winning. With salt blonde hair, blue eyes, and a perfectly tailored suit, he had the posture of someone who'd never been challenged by a teenager. Your Honor, he said, rising with dramatic pause, this courtroom should not be a platform for untested theatrics. He turned to Marcus. The plaintiff's representative, however articulate, lacks the real-world experience to understand the nuance of this case. Some in the audience nodded. Others frowned. But Marcus remained motionless, his hands steady on the lectern, eyes locked on the judge. Before Judge Bennett could respond, Marcus spoke. With all due respect, Your Honor, this isn't about my age or my background. It's about the facts. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He picked up another paper and held it up. This is a sworn statement from Mrs. Brooks's neighbors, verifying her residency since 1992. Greenfield has never occupied or managed the land, not once. He handed the affidavit to the bailiff. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't surprise, it was attention. The boy had turned the room in his favor, and he wasn't finished. Judge Bennett rested his elbow on the bench and pressed his fingers together beneath his chin. Mr. Reed, he said, you've made some compelling points. But how do you explain the fact that this case only reached court after Greenfield filed for emergency possession? Marcus answered without hesitation. Because Greenfield used its influence to delay Mrs. Brooks's original filing. She was ignored until the company forced the issue. We are here today not because she failed the system, but because the system failed her. A murmur of agreement passed through the gallery. Even Bennett leaned back, absorbing the weight of those words. Marcus took a breath and turned to the projection screen. With the court's permission, he said, I'd like to show evidence of land maintenance and occupation by Mrs. Brooks over the last 20 years. Judge Bennett nodded. Marcus clicked a remote and a slideshow began. Images of a modest home, a garden with hand-planted flowers, family gatherings, and utility bills spanning decades. This is more than property, Marcus said. It's her life, her history, her roots. In the second row, Eleanor Brooks wiped a tear discreetly. Her hands still trembled, but her heart swelled with pride. Across the aisle, Charles Whitman adjusted his cufflinks and stood again. Your Honor, I object to this emotional presentation being treated as legal proof. His voice cut sharply through the stillness. A slideshow cannot replace deed validation or title history. Marcus didn't flinch. I agree, he replied. That's why I also submitted satellite imagery, dated tax records, and sworn neighbor affidavits, all corroborating occupation by the Brooks family. He handed over the supporting packet to the clerk. The judge gestured for the documents. Whitman blinked, then sat back down, his confidence visibly shaken. As the judge reviewed the materials, Marcus stepped back slightly, giving him space. The gallery remained silent, focused. Marcus stood tall, his shoulders squared, his eyes fixed on the bench. He didn't need to rehearse the facts, he lived them. This wasn't just a case, it was a statement. A 17-year-old black boy, raised by a single mother in South Atlanta, standing toe-to-toe with power and privilege, and winning ground. For Mrs. Brooks, for others like her. The judge finally looked up, and in that glance, there was something new. Respect. Judge Bennett cleared his throat. The documents are thorough, he admitted, but we haven't yet heard from the defense regarding the legitimacy of their claim. Charles Whitman stood again, walking slowly to the front with a confident stride. Your Honor, Greenfield Corporation purchased the land legally through a third-party acquisition. All transaction paperwork is in order. We have no interest in unjustly removing anyone, but we cannot allow outdated records or emotional appeals to undermine corporate law. His voice was smooth, but the crowd remained cold. The tone had shifted. Marcus had raised the bar. Whitman continued, holding up a folder. We will demonstrate that the seller in question was alive and legally authorized at the time of transfer. He passed it to the judge, but Marcus stepped forward. Respectfully, Your Honor, that document is a photocopy, not an original, and the notarized page is missing the state registration seal. Judge Bennett raised an eyebrow. Is that accurate, Mr. Whitman? Whitman hesitated. We may not have the original present. The courtroom buzzed. A photocopy. No seal. Mrs. Brooks leaned forward in her seat, a flicker of hope returning to her eyes. Judge Bennett nodded slowly, setting the folder aside. We'll examine the original if and when it becomes available, he said. Then turning to Marcus, he added, For now, proceed with your next point. Marcus pulled out another document. This is a forensic report from a handwriting specialist. It indicates the signature on Greenfield's deed does not match verified samples from the previous owner. In fact, it shows signs of mechanical duplication. He handed it over. This time, even the defense team looked alarmed. Marcus wasn't just defending, he was dismantling a machine. The judge adjusted his glasses and reread the document. His jaw tightened slightly. Mr. Whitman, your response? The older man shifted uncomfortably. We contest the validity of that report and request time to verify its methodology. Judge Bennett raised a hand. Noted. But the evidence stands unless disproven. Marcus remained silent, hands folded in front of him. Around the room, expressions were changing. Those who had once doubted him now leaned in with curiosity and respect. And in that moment, Marcus wasn't just a boy in a courtroom. He was becoming something more, something undeniable. Judge Bennett turned his attention back to Marcus. Do you have any witnesses prepared to testify regarding the long-term occupation of the property? Marcus nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to call Mr. Leroy Daniels to the stand. From the back of the room, a man in his late 60s stood and approached. African-American, broad-shouldered, with deep laugh lines and a gray cap in hand, Leroy was a retired mechanic and neighbor of Mrs. Brooks for over 25 years. As he took his seat, Marcus walked to the witness podium with quiet confidence. The courtroom shifted again. Now it was about truth from lived experience. Mr. Daniels, Marcus began, can you confirm how long you've lived next to Mrs. Brooks? 26 years, Leroy answered in a gravelly voice. And during that time, has she ever left the property for extended periods? Never. She's been on that land, rain or shine, planting her garden, raising her family. That land is hers. Always has been. And did you ever witness representatives from Greenfield Corporation visiting the property before this case? Not once, Leroy said, shaking his head. Only showed up when they wanted to take it. The truth hung heavy in the room. No polish, no legal jargon, just facts. Charles Whitman rose slowly for the cross-examination. Mr. Daniels, would you consider yourself emotionally invested in this case? Leroy straightened in the chair. I consider myself emotionally invested in the truth. Whitman smirked faintly. And would you say your long-standing friendship with Mrs. Brooks might affect your objectivity? If telling the truth makes me biased, then sure. Laughter bubbled from the gallery before Judge Bennett raised a hand for silence. Even he had to bite back a grin. Whitman sat down with clenched teeth. Leroy Daniels had just become a problem he hadn't prepared for. Marcus thanked Mr. Daniels and dismissed him from the stand. As Leroy returned to his seat, he gave Mrs. Brooks a respectful nod, and she returned it with a grateful smile. Marcus took a moment before speaking again. Your Honor, I'd also like to submit a notarized timeline of property maintenance completed by Mrs. Brooks's family, supported by receipts, photographs, and utility records. He handed the folder to the bailiff. The stack was thick, real, traceable history, proof that couldn't be denied. Whitman glanced down at his own table and, for the first time, found nothing more to add. Judge Bennett flipped through the newly submitted documents, page by page. Dates, receipts, water bills, photographs, everything lined up. He paused briefly at an image of Eleanor Brooks tending to a vegetable garden beside her home, wearing the same floral dress she wore in court. Impressive documentation, he murmured, more to himself than the room. Marcus stood silently, his hands folded in front of him, waiting. The judge looked up. Defense may respond. Whitman stood but said nothing for a moment. He scanned the judge's expression, Marcus's confidence, and Eleanor's hopeful eyes. Then he spoke carefully. "We reserve our comments." Marcus returned to his spot beside the lectern and let the silence sit for a moment. "Your Honor," he said softly, "this case is not just about legal ownership. It's about justice." He glanced at Mrs. Brooks, then continued. "A corporation is trying to erase 30 years of life, community, and dignity with a single piece of paper, and that piece of paper is already falling apart." His voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. The gallery leaned in, and even the bailiff standing at the back had his eyes fixed on Marcus. The courtroom was no longer skeptical. It was listening. Outside, the storm had calmed, but inside the courtroom, the air was thicker than ever. Judge Bennett set down his glasses and looked directly at Marcus. "You're young, Mr. Reed," he said. "Very young. But I'll admit, what you've presented so far is more thorough than many seasoned lawyers I've seen." A murmur passed through the gallery. Marcus simply nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge raised a hand. "This doesn't mean I've made a decision, but it does mean you've earned this court's full attention. Proceed." Marcus took a quiet breath. The fight was far from over, but he had leveled the field. Marcus opened a final folder. "I'd like to introduce the testimony of a former Greenfield employee who witnessed internal discussions about targeting Mrs. Brooks's land." Gasps echoed softly. Even Whitman's face twitched. "The witness has requested anonymity, but their statement has been legally certified and filed under sealed affidavit." He passed the sealed envelope to the judge. They detail how Greenfield executives knew the land was occupied, but moved forward anyway, assuming Mrs. Brooks lacked the means to fight back. The courtroom fell into complete silence. Even the clock ticking on the wall seemed louder than usual. Judge Bennett held the sealed affidavit for a long moment, then handed it to the court clerk for review. He folded his hands and looked at Marcus. "Mr. Reed, you are aware that submitting a false statement carries severe legal consequences?" Marcus nodded firmly. "Yes, Your Honor. I verified the identity and credibility of the source myself. This isn't about speculation. It's about exposing the truth." Judge Bennett nodded, his expression unreadable. Across the aisle, Charles Whitman whispered urgently to one of his associates. The room was slowly slipping from his control, and he could feel it. The clerk nodded to the judge, confirming the affidavit had been properly filed and sealed. Judge Bennett tapped the gavel gently. "Let the record reflect the submission of confidential testimony under seal." He turned toward Whitman. "Does the defense have a rebuttal?" Whitman stood, hesitant for the first time. "Your Honor, we request time to review the affidavit and verify the source." "You'll have your time," Bennett replied, his voice flat. "But we won't ignore what's already on record." Marcus watched silently, his face calm, but inside, his heart pounded. He was pushing against a mountain, and it was starting to shift. The judge announced a 10-minute recess. As he exited, murmurs broke out across the room. Marcus stepped away from the lectern and returned to his seat. Mrs. Brooks reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "You're doing beautifully," she whispered. Marcus gave a soft nod, but his face didn't relax. Across the aisle, Whitman stepped out into the hallway, phone already to his ear. His polished shoes clicked angrily on the tile. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. The hardest part was still ahead. But he had come too far to let fear speak now. 10 minutes later, the courtroom filled again. The judge re-entered, his robe billowing slightly as he took his seat. "Let's proceed," he said. Marcus rose and returned to the front. He straightened his papers, but before he could speak, Charles Whitman stood. "Your Honor, we would like to file a formal motion to dismiss the affidavit due to anonymity of the witness." Judge Bennett shook his head slowly. "Motion denied. The court accepts the statement unless proven invalid. Do you intend to provide counter-evidence?" Whitman hesitated. "We're reviewing our options." The gallery knew what that meant. They had nothing. Just as Marcus was about to proceed, a soft commotion stirred near the courtroom entrance. The bailiff leaned in to whisper something to the judge, who nodded with a flicker of curiosity. "Mr. Reed," Judge Bennett said, "we have a request for testimony from someone not previously listed on your witness sheet." Marcus turned, confused. The doors opened. In stepped a tall black woman in her mid-40s, wearing a dark green coat and clutching a leather folder. Marcus froze. It was Angela Reed, his mother. She has filed a last-minute affidavit, the judge continued, and I'm inclined to hear it. Angela Reed stepped to the front, composed and strong. Your Honor, she said, I'm not here to speak as Marcus's mother. I'm here as a witness to the history of what that land means to our community. The judge motioned for her to be sworn in. Once seated, she opened her folder. I used to clean houses for executives who worked at Greenfield. I overheard meetings, conversations, documents left out like I didn't exist. She held up a photocopy. This memo outlines a plan to target low-income properties for quiet acquisition. Mrs. Brooks's address is highlighted. The gallery gasped. Charles Whitman bolted up. Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay and speculative. Judge Bennett raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Whitman. We'll let the witness finish. Angela turned the page. There's more. Names of neighborhoods. Target dates. They didn't think anyone cleaning their floors could read legal language. She turned to the courtroom. But I could. And I taught my son to read them, too. Marcus blinked, holding back emotion. His mother had spent years in silence, absorbing injustice. And now, she was the final key. Whitman dropped his pen. He knew this wasn't salvageable. As Angela left the stand, the room was silent. She passed Marcus, resting a hand on his shoulder for just a moment. He looked at her with reverence, then turned back to the judge. Your Honor, Marcus said, this is no longer just a dispute over paperwork. This is systemic erasure, masked in procedure. The judge didn't speak immediately. He adjusted his glasses, eyes scanning the documents again. Then he closed the file. Court will recess for 1 hour while I review the testimony and supporting evidence. The gavel struck. But in everyone's mind, the verdict had already begun to form. The courtroom emptied slowly for recess, but Marcus remained at the lectern, silently reviewing his notes. He wasn't reading them. He was centering himself. His mother's testimony had changed everything. Beside him, Mrs. Brooks stood and placed a gentle hand on his back. Your mama's a warrior, she said with a smile. Marcus smiled back faintly. So are you. Behind them, the gallery buzzed with discussion. Reporters whispered into phones. Court officers exchanged glances. Even the clerk, who hadn't cracked a smile all morning, gave Marcus a respectful nod. The tide had shifted, and now everyone felt it. In the hallway outside, Charles Whitman paced like a lion in a cage. His associate approached, whispering, "Do we try to settle?" Whitman snapped, "Not yet." But the doubt was in his eyes. He had underestimated the boy, the mother, and the woman whose land he tried to steal. Worse, his own arrogance had left him vulnerable. Nothing in their playbook had prepared them for resistance like this. He glanced toward the courtroom doors. For the first time in his career, Whitman saw a story slipping from his control. And it wasn't just a loss, it was a public reckoning. When the court reconvened, the room felt different. Judge Bennett entered briskly, his face unreadable. Marcus returned to the lectern, his hands steady.